Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to the European Inter-University Center for Human Rights and Democratization at the Lido of Venice. My name is Manfred Nowak. I am Secretary General of this institution, which is a network of European universities active in the field of human rights and democratization, and we are at the same time the hub of what we call the global campus. And the global campus is a network of about 100 universities around the world that are organizing 7 regional master programs in human rights and democratization in all different world regions, in Latin America, Africa, in Asia Pacific, in the Arab world, in the Balkans, in the Caucasus region, but of course also here in Europe, where we run the European Master Program on human rights and democratization. Already for 20 years we are celebrating our 20th anniversary with our graduation ceremony in September. And this is an European Union initiated and also primarily funded project. Let me say at the outset that I'm pleased that so many of you have been coming, also from international organizations, from the media, from foundations. Also welcome the students of the Venice School who are here. And I make perhaps say a particular welcome to Koen van Mechelen, who is sitting here, and who is the author. He is the artist who actually dedicated to us this beautiful statue, the sculpture of Carrara marble in the courtyard, in the cloister of our monastery. And it was dedicated to us, its collective memory, dedicated to us also with the support, the financial support in particular, of the Adriano Berengo Foundation. And I also welcome Jane Rushton from the foundation. And you might afterwards also look down and have a look at this beautiful sculpture, which creates a lot of hope in difficult times. And also you might wish to speak to Koen van Mechelen, and he might explain you a little bit more about this. This press conference here is in the presence of Lamya Haji Bashar, the 2016 Sakharov Prize Laureate, and we are very honored that she is here and that she is participating in the 8th Venice School that we are organizing here at the Lido. It's a school of human rights where we closely cooperate with the Sakharov program of the European Parliament. And cooperating means that on the one hand, the European Parliament enables Sakharov fellows to come here and participate in the Venice School. Those are human rights defenders working in various regions of the world in order to participate in the Venice School. But in addition, and most importantly, it also links us with some of the Sakharov laureates, and the most recent one is Lamya, who will be in the center of this press conference. What is the Venice School? The Venice School is, and we have done it now for 8 years, is an initiative to really discuss major problems and challenges to human rights and democracy. And this year is under the theme of human rights as our responsibility. And that means in difficult times, and we do live probably in most difficult times for human rights, democracy, the rule of law, perhaps since the end of World War II. We are faced with so many different challenges whether it's armed conflicts, whether it's terrorism, organized crime, corruption, rising inequality, global financial and economic crisis, climate change and ecological crisis, etc., that have a direct impact also on human rights and democracy. And we see the new authoritarianism not only outside of Europe, we see it even within the European Union. And we try to react to these global challenges and European challenges, the shrinking space of civil society. And the best way of reacting is to stand up, not simply to resignate, but to stand up civil society, the academic community, but of course also human rights defenders who are increasingly under attack. And that is why we call it human rights as our responsibility, because we feel it's a joint responsibility of all the different sectors of society, including the corporate sector, to really fight against this shrinking space of civil society and attacks on our human rights and democratic values. Now, the school is organized in 3 clusters. One is business and human rights, and Giulia Di Tommaso is the cluster leader. The second one is human rights defenders, which is, of course, very much in the foreground also in the other clusters. It's led by George Ulrich, our academic director at EIUC. And, of course, for this particular cluster, it's the third one, sexual violence in conflict, which is led by Kalliope Agapiou, who is sitting here, and who is, of course, closely connected in having invited also Lamya to come here. As you probably know, Lamya went through hell, but she didn't lose hope, and I think that is for us so important. She is also standing up, and she is fighting on the one hand for the human rights of the Yazidi minority, the Yazidi community, in her country, but also in other countries. But at the same time also she is brave enough, courageous enough to tell the world about the atrocities committed by the so-called Islamic State, and in particular atrocities committed against women and children, gender-based violence. As I said, I'm particularly honored that you are with us today, and she will be assisted by Mirza Dinai, who is sitting next to me, in also translating to her and taking care of her during this trip. But before I give the floor to Lamya, I ask Letitia Anderson, who is sitting next to me, for a few words. She is the Advocacy and Women's Rights Advisor to the United Nations Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Zainab Hawa Bangura of Sierra Leone, who unfortunately couldn't come herself. But you had a very long career both in UN Women, or what is today called UN Women, but also in the ICRC, and you were very much involved in these very issues of gender-based violence in relation to armed conflict. So I would like to ask you first for a few words, and then I give the floor to Kalliope, but then finally we will listen to Lamya.
Thank you very much. It's a huge pleasure and a privilege to be here at the Venice School for Human Rights on behalf of the United Nations Office of the Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict. I want to start by warmly congratulating and commending Lamya on her achievements. Obviously, there can be no human rights without human rights defenders. So on behalf of the United Nations also, we would applaud her heroic efforts. I wanted to note actually that this focus on sexual violence is extremely timely, as it actually comes on the eve of the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict, which is due to take place in just a few days on the 19th of June. The United Nations General Assembly created this day to raise awareness of conflict-related sexual violence, which has been called history's greatest silence and the world's least condemned crime of war, to pay tribute to the survivors of sexual violence, like Lamya, who give hope and voice to countless others, and to stand in solidarity with those working on the front lines courageously and often at great personal risk to support them. And as we have noted, all the trends point to a shrinking space for human rights defenders, humanitarian workers in general, and I would say women's human rights defenders and women humanitarian workers in particular. I wanted to point out that the theme of the International Day for this year is preventing sexual violence crimes through justice and deterrence. The point is, how do we translate accountability into behavioural change and into prevention? How do we reach that tipping point whereby the fear of consequences actually deters would-be perpetrators, and that accountability becomes the rule rather than the rare exception? How do we reach a point where justice is done and seen to be done for sexual violence survivors, and it becomes consistent enough to actually have a preventive and deterrent impact? So that is the ultimate goal that we're trying to galvanise the international community behind. I wanted to share with you the work of our office, which was established by the United Nations Security Council in 2010, pursuant to a resolution that was actually a historical breakthrough in recognising that sexual violence is not just an inevitable byproduct of war, it is not just collateral damage, it is a tactic of war, it is a tactic of terrorism, and it is used by state and non-state belligerent parties to armed conflict to advance their military, political and economic aims. Our office works with national governments to strengthen institutional safeguards against impunity, to ensure there is justice and redress for survivors. We work to transform the cultures of security sector institutions so they are accessible and responsive to women, and to change the deep DNA of military and security institutions to make these crimes not inevitable, but in fact unthinkable. So that is the challenge that we face, and recently our office has monitored and reported to the Security Council on the trading, trafficking, sale and holding to ransom of women and girls in connection with the conflicts in Syria and Iraq as part of the political economy of conflict and terrorism. This actually serves to fund and sustain the operation of armed groups. So the proceeds from the trafficking and sale of women and girls, as much as oil and antiquities, is being used to purchase further arms and to sustain the operation of these groups. This engages the responsibility of the Security Council, its sanctions committees, and all of those working to divest and degrade the capacity of terrorist organisations. So the aim is to engage non-traditional actors in terms of gender-based violence. That is peace, security and rule of law actors, to show that no military or political leader is above the law and no woman or girl is beneath the scope of its protection. Last September, our office actually agreed a joint communique with the government of Iraq, specifically on justice and redress for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. However, the shocking reality is that not a single perpetrator of sexual violence as a war crime, a crime against humanity, or an act of genocide has been brought to justice in connection with the 7-year Syria conflict. And that includes not a single Daesh militant, even though we know that these crimes attract universal jurisdiction and are immune from amnesty, and every state that has a perpetrator on their territory has a positive obligation to either prosecute or extradite that perpetrator. So what we need to work towards, I believe, is converting the vicious cycle of silence, denial and impunity into a virtuous cycle of reporting, recognition and redress. The great ideological challenge of our time is really between universal human rights and rising violent extremism and fundamentalism. And every step forward for women's rights, women's autonomy and women's freedoms is also a fight, a step forward in the fight against terrorism and violent extremism. We know that war and terrorism have never been gender neutral, and our response cannot be gender blind. So that is why our office engages all parties in the fight against terrorism, including the Anti-ISIL Coalition, the Security Council, and member states directly to support these efforts. And I would thank and just commend once again the Venice School for putting a spotlight on these issues at such a critical moment in our history, and for Lamya for converting horror into hope.
Thank you very much, Letitia. Kalliope Agapiou-Josephydes is a long-standing friend of our network. She's representing and has been representing the University of Cyprus in our network since the very beginning when they joined EMA and EIUC, and she also has been vice president of the European Inter-University Center. She is here the cluster leader, and I'm very happy to actually also, and I congratulated you already to your very recent nomination and election as the chairperson of the European Institute for Gender Equality in Vilnius, which is the main European Union agency dealing with gender equality. Could we have a few words from you as the cluster leader?
Just not to have it that in the face. Thank you so much. It's a great honor for me to be here and to talk to you. Having recognized what Letitia Anderson has just said, we thought that it was, the timing was fine to focus this year cluster on gender, on this horrible crime that was for so many years and so many decades or even centuries completely invisible to humanity. Even in the 90s onwards, we had in Rwanda 500,000 women raped. Did the international community hear about that? Not much. So it's a horrible crime that went on as specific to a certain culture, and I'm grateful that the United Nations declared a war to that culture, because it really maintains this phenomenon on and on. So we need to break the silence over the phenomenon, and that's why I'm particularly happy in this institution in Venice of the European Inter-University Center for Human Rights and Democratization and the global campus that connect us to all continents of the world to work together on these specific issues, because wherever we are, the patterns are the same. So we have a lot to learn from each other in terms of prevention, in terms of reparations, and also put the victims in the center of the whole process. Because for the time being, not much attention was given to the victims. And this is why we are particularly honored and grateful to Lamya for accepting our invitation to be here with us today. Thanks a lot, Lamya. She just shared with us a very touching testimony, and we're very grateful to hear for that. It really enriched our perspectives. So discussing human rights serious violations from a gender perspective allow us to see the invisible human rights violations. Invisible, even if they occur at a large scale, to hear the unheard screamings, to hear silenced voices, and this is a real privilege to walk in such an environment. And I would like to congratulate EIUC for its commitment to gender issues, to keep on the gender lenses in respect of human rights. Because if human rights activists themselves dismiss the gender dimension, then we are in real trouble. So I would like to welcome this commitment of EIUC in this respect, and I'm very glad and pleased to be here today. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Kalliope. And I think now it's time to give the floor to our guest of honor today, Lamya Haji Bashar, to hear what you would like to tell us. Please.
I would like to thank you very much for this invitation to come to the school and for this nice invitation to participate in the course, to speak about women's rights and suffering and rights of children. I think it's very important for all of us to work, all of us together, defending human rights, because one single person cannot do. We should collect all our powers to defend together the human rights, to stop the atrocities against women. The first day as Daesh captured me, I didn't believe even that I would be able to speak against them. I gave everything up, and I didn't believe that even I will speak bad about them because of fearing that I had. But after I tried 4 times in the captivity to escape, and I was every time captured by them, this gave me more power, and I decided to fight against them and to be the voice of those women and children who were captured. Last year in May, as I came to Germany after I have been treated, I asked Mirza Dinai to accompany him in his lobby fighting the women's rights, and I joined him in his work and went to the parliament to defend and speak about the crimes of Daesh. Therefore, I think it's very important that we will not neglect the suffering of women, and that we will bring more awareness to the suffering of those women and their rights, so that not the woman will be the first victim of the war. And thank you very much again for you.
Thank you very much, Lamya. And that provides us now with an opportunity to raise questions, particularly to Lamya, but perhaps also to the other panelists, about whatever you are interested in addition to the information we provided you in the press folder. Please. Who would like to break the ice? Please. There is, I think, a second microphone.
Well, first of all, thanks again for being with us. So quite often in the work we do, when we work on women's issues, we're accused of working on some kind of, they say, liberal agenda, or they say it's political correctness. And in Turkey, where I come from, we find it very difficult to actually express that, no, these aren't secondary issues. This is the core of the problem. So I suppose what can we do to make it clear that this is a critical issue that the entire community needs to address, and that it's not just something that can be cast aside? What are the tools we can use to do this? Mm-hmm. That's to the whole panel, really.
Thank you very much. I think we should collect a number of questions and then go back to the panel. And I forgot, if you would please identify yourself when you take the floor. I think I saw first you, please.
When she escaped from Islamic State. Lamya, I remember that you told me all your hell in the hands, of these barbars. But now the question is, you recover, your face is much better, I'm very happy to see it. The question is, what would you like to do now, even after this conference? You would like to have any plan to be a kind of ambassador in the world, for the suffering of many of Yazidi girls still in the hands of Daesh? Tell us something about the other girls that are not free like you, that didn't escape like you, that are not lucky like you, even if you suffer a lot.
Thank you. Please, can we collect still a few other questions or comments I see here?
Hello. I want to thank you for being here and thank you for your bravery. My question is more focused on what the global community can do to address issues like this in our varying professions, whether it be through development work or private sector or working with governments. What role do we play in preventing this from happening moving forward? What investments do we need to make in communities like the ones that you hail from on the ground, and ensuring that things like this do not happen moving forward to women and girls that are just like you, who are hoping that someone can not just speak on their behalf, but come in and make a sustainable change from the bottom down. It's easy for us to come around in these events and discuss issues at a higher level, but really what needs to be done, more looking at the local angle. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else at this first round? Then I would say let's go back, and I would first like to give Lamya the floor to respond, and then perhaps others would like to respond to the first question.
سؤالي متبيو قصدي مدافعة حقوق الإنسان بكم حقوق الجنكي كان بزديم في شغلي بقى مدافعة جناها كلم لي ديا قرنس أز بكم مدافعة إنسان بكم وقلق ما منجبر سؤالاتي.
Thank you very much, Fausto, for your question. My target is to defend the rights of women to stay in this way, because I think my life has a reason how I survived ISIS, and therefore I would like to stay defending the woman right, human right, and women like me in all other communities, and I will stay in this way.
إجبارها كشلو دولة كان تشتكي بمكان وكا حماية أقليات بكن وحماية جنكا زاروكا بمكا أفتشجا كدينا كهري ومحاسبة ويمترمي بيكرن كأوي أبجرائمت وكرين ومحاسبة فكري وان بيكرن.
I think the global community can do in our case specifically, to protect the minorities and to have not only those legal frameworks, but also to punish the people who committed crimes directly, not postponed it. So this could help. Who would like to? The question there, maybe you can answer it.
Thank you. I'll just respond to the first question. I think we all need to remember there is a very robust normative and legal framework on this issue. What I think is going on is that, laws have very little power unless they are known. And we often in this field talk about the implementation gap, but what I think we also need to talk about is the dissemination gap. We need to make these laws and policies much more widely known and embedded in the culture of justice and security sector institutions. So, for example, the Security Council has a very robust series of resolutions on conflict-related sexual violence, which are not aspirations, they are obligations for all member states, and they provide that any state or non-state party to armed conflict that commits patterns of sexual violence will be named and shamed in annual reports of the Secretary-General. They will be escalated to sanctions. They can be referred to the International Criminal Court. The Security Council can establish hybrid tribunals or commissions of inquiry, or give peacekeepers explicit mandates to address these crimes. So there are consequences. I just think they need to be better known. And we all have a role to play in disseminating and socializing these understandings in institutions. I think even the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court is an important standard in recognizing sexual violence as a war crime, crime against humanity, and act of genocide. But that needs to be universalized. The Rome Statute system works when it's a universal system. Even the Geneva Conventions on the Laws of War have 42 articles in the whole corpus of international humanitarian law that speak specifically to women's protection. But very few people know them, and they're very rarely disseminated as part of the conventional training on IHL that every armed force around the globe undergoes. So I think we have a dissemination challenge. I think, as you say, these are not byproducts of the war. These crimes are the war. The wars are being fought on the bodies of women and girls. Daesh, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Ansar Dine, a range of groups know that they cannot achieve their strategic aims without women and girls, without forcibly impregnating women and girls, abducting, forcibly marrying women and girls. So they know the importance of this issue. And if our response does not equally put women and girls at the center, we will always be a step behind. So I would just say that, one guiding principle I carry with me is that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. We can't solve military problems with military solutions. We can't solve the problem of a world awash with weapons by sending in more weapons. What we need is transformative solutions. We need to amplify the voices of women like Lamya. We need feminist-informed solutions that are based on gender equality and women's empowerment to truly transform the problems that we're facing.
Just 2 words. The first is what to do is not allow normalization, because once a phenomenon is considered as normal, nobody cares about it. So please do not allow the phenomenon to continue to be, in fact, normalized, either accepted as a byproduct of war or in any other context. So that's clear. So not allow normalization. And the second I would like to stress is that we need to target the major root cause, which is the unequal status of men and women in the world. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Any other comments, questions, please?
Hi, it's Vera Mantengoli speaking. I would like to ask you which is your idea of man today. And violence is also a daily atrocity to a lot of women, and what would you like to say to all these women? Thank you.
You mean the victims? To the victims?
to the daily victims.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Please. No further comments or questions? Oh, yes, please.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Anderson. You just said that we should help people like women like Lamya to raise their voice. And what's the role of the United Nations in it? What should and what could the United Nations do to raise the voice of women like Lamya?
Mm-hmm. All right. Everything.
Hello. Thank you. So for my question, I'm from Tunisia, and my country, like 5,000 young people already, I say that, were recruited by Daesh and went there. And a lot of these people are women. This is called jihad nikah, which is to go and do jihad, but all the sex slaves there. So this is really a problem that exists in our country, as the first country that export, bring terrorists there to Daesh, and the problem for us is mainly when they will return back. So and they are already returning back. So this will be considered as a big problem for us, especially in terms of freedom and in terms of as a threat to our revolution and our democratic process. During our my organization work, we detected that three main causes were three main reasons why young people, at least Tunisian, went to Daesh. First, it's like search of identity. Like they consider that religion is their identity, so they went there searching the identity, and it was like the least one. The second one was search of money, economy, because they pay them a lot. And the third one was search of leadership, because there they will govern, they will give orders, they are the leaders there, not like in their countries where they're excluded from participation. So, yes, it was just a comment. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Final one. Then I give back again first to Lamya.
قوتن بس منش اما بقنا سبا اما بقنا خدام شخرا بس بجنا همو دحا كاملت وسانو وكاملت وكا قوتنا داعش نكارن نبس شوي تشترم كارن قالك تشتي بك.
Maybe my first message to those victims who were in the captivity, I would tell them ISIS wanted to make us slaves without human values. I will tell them we are still here, we are still strong, and they cannot they couldn't eliminate us.
از بجمعان زلامي داعش كا وقيم قردين كوان زلاما جو هوا خلاص بناش دستيمانينا وكهون خلاص شبنهم نكارن بيشبريكي بساكنوا وتشتف سري وهاتيهم بيش كساكا از بجمعان زلامي داعش افتش نبو وابمكارن البيشبري وان بساكنوا في تشتف سري مهاتيهم بيش.
And for the men who are doing this violence, I say we are so powerful, we can stay in front of them and tell them what they did. We will not withdraw, we will not keep it silent, we will stay against them and in front of them and tell everybody about the crimes.
Thank you. What can the United Nations do to give Lamya a voice?
Yeah, thank you for that great question. An important part of our mandate as the Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict is really to bridge the voices of survivors and grassroots civil society leaders to decision makers and policy spaces. So part of what our office does is facilitate the participation of women from conflict zones in the debates of the Security Council, in General Assembly meetings in New York, so that all of those deliberations can be informed by the ground truths, the perspectives of the survivors themselves. We will never have protection without participation. So we equally support the representation and participation of women in all peace and security processes as a means of securing their protection and justice, whatever justice means to them, because it's not just about law, it's about justice, which means social justice, conditions of equality, reparations, and recognition. We speak sometimes about bridging the grassroots and the treetops. So we try to better connect the grassroots survivors and civil society organizations with the realm of high policy in New York or Geneva, so that these are working in tandem from the bottom up to the top down. We all have the same objective. So absolutely, we try to amplify the voices of survivors and women's rights activists in high-level policy spaces. And when we go to the field and go to conflict zones, as we do on a regular basis, we meet with the survivors and organizations supporting them and carry their voices to the highest levels of their governments.
Again, very briefly, I fully endorse the transformative approach of the United Nations in this respect, and I would like to thank the lady who talked about what about the violence, the daily atrocity that women are going through. And I would like to thank her because our, let's say, academic evidence suggests that this phenomenon happens during the war because it is accepted in everyday life. It is just amplified and worsened during war. So if we know to tackle the phenomenon and stopping the phenomenon of sexual violence and violence in general against women during wars, is also, we have to work also during peacetime. And we have, at the normative level, we have enough instruments to deal with. We have the last in the series, the Istanbul Convention to fight both in times of peace and times of war, so to fight violence against women in all settings. We have the Maputo Protocol for Africa and the Belém do Pará Convention for Latin America. And we have all this work that is done that is not aspirations but obligations under international law. So it's, we need to use this normative, this comprehensive normative framework to inform our human rights defenders' work on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
All right, that concludes our press conference, and I do invite all of you to join us to go down to the courtyard and also to have individual interviews if you wish, but of course also perhaps to connect our two symbols of hope, Lamya with the little child that is sitting on top of the collective memory. So please come down with us. I'm thanking very much all of you for coming here, but of course in particular our guest of honor, Lamya, Letitia and Kalliope. Thank you.